I had a department gathering, had a bit too much to drink, and a male colleague with a car offered to drop me off downstairs. When I got out of the car, he kindly approached and steadied my swaying body. He asked, "Do you want me to take you upstairs?" I understood the implication of being escorted upstairs, even though I was a bit drunk but still conscious. "No need, I can manage on my own," I said, pushing away his support. He didn't insist, just smiled faintly and walked away. Turning around, my alcohol-induced haze couldn't fully restrain my senses. As I steadied myself, I noticed a figure at the entrance of the building. Hands in his pockets, he looked grim, and his tone was mocking. "Ruby, are you now settling for anything available?" I approached, stabilized myself against the nearby wall, and replied, "Luke is an unexpected guest." "Well, tit for tat." Luke walked towards me, his tall figure casting a shadow over me, and he frowned. "Ruby, look at yourself now." His tone was that of someone lecturing me, which was laughable. "Luke, what right do you have to accuse me?" I sneered. "I am your husband," he declared. I chuckled, mocking him for daring to bring up those two words. I lowered my head, rummaged through my bag, took out my phone, and held it up to him. "Is this bold enough? Your outside woman sent me a message asking for my congratulations on her pregnancy." Luke gritted his teeth, his face growing even darker. This man, who claimed to be my husband, was cheating on me behind my back. His affair was with someone in the same profession as me, and a few years ago, she had been fired from the company for embezzlement. We confronted each other for a moment. He sighed lightly, averted his gaze without offering any explanation. I put away my phone, reached into my bag once again, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it. The taste of love is not as exhilarating as that of a cigarette. I had a department gathering, had a bit too much to drink, and a male colleague with a car offered to drop me off downstairs. When I got out of the car, he kindly approached and steadied my swaying body. He asked, "Do you want me to take you upstairs?" I understood the implication of being escorted upstairs, even though I was a bit drunk but still conscious. "No need, I can manage on my own," I said, pushing away his support. He didn't insist, just smiled faintly and walked away. Turning around, my alcohol-induced haze couldn't fully restrain my senses. As I steadied myself, I noticed a figure at the entrance of the building. Hands in his pockets, he looked grim, and his tone was mocking. "Ruby, are you now settling for anything available?" I approached, stabilized myself against the nearby wall, and replied, "Luke is an unexpected guest." "Well, tit for tat." Luke walked towards me, his tall figure casting a shadow over me, and he frowned. "Ruby, look at yourself now." His tone was that of someone lecturing me, which was laughable. "Luke, what right do you have to accuse me?" I sneered. "I am your husband," he declared. I chuckled, mocking him for daring to bring up those two words. I lowered my head, rummaged through my bag, took out my phone, and held it up to him. "Is this bold enough? Your outside woman sent me a message asking for my congratulations on her pregnancy." Luke gritted his teeth, his face growing even darker. This man, who claimed to be my husband, was cheating on me behind my back. His affair was with someone in the same profession as me, and a few years ago, she had been fired from the company for embezzlement. We confronted each other for a moment. He sighed lightly, averted his gaze without offering any explanation. I put away my phone, reached into my bag once again, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it. The taste of love is not as exhilarating as that of a cigarette. Luke dislikes the smell of smoke. I deliberately learned to smoke after finding out about his affair, intending to disgust him. Staying out all night became open and frequent, and whenever I returned home, the scent of smoke would make him frown. He resented me and refused to divorce, yet occasionally displayed lingering affections, half true and half false. Wanting me to experience what his mother went through, Luke frowned, reached over, snatched the cigarette from my hand, threw it on the ground, and forcefully stamped it out underfoot. The smell of the smoke helped me calm down. I glanced at him and stood up to go home. He didn't follow but warned me from behind, "Ruby, don't play too recklessly. Remember your identity." I couldn't help but want to laugh. Compared to him, I felt like a minor player challenging a grandmaster. As I opened the door, I noticed a cake on the dining table. Approaching, I found it was from the place we used to love, covered in strawberries. Only Luke knew about it. Unfortunately, now, I felt the sweetness was too much. I took the strawberry cake to the kitchen intending to throw it away when my phone received a provocation from the third party. She asked, "Is it lonely celebrating your birthday alone?" Along with it was a picture of her and my husband celebrating together. She said, "Last week, he spent it with me." I clenched my phone, threw the cake into the trash, and received another challenge from the third party. Recently, with a critical project on hand, my colleagues and I were busy for a while. The day the project finally succeeded, we went to a bar to celebrate. She raised her glass to me and said, "Our little boss is still causing you trouble, huh?" The little boss she mentioned was Caleb, the son of my current company's boss. I lowered my head to drink, concealing my emotions. Thinking of that kid, my heart inexplicably trembled. Caleb, placed in the company for training by his father, was in charge of part of the projects and acted as my direct supervisor. Initially, he found fault with many aspects of my work and frequently approached me. Later, during a business trip, our relationship took a subtle turn. Caleb, with a poor tolerance for alcohol, got drunk that night, and I helped him back to his hotel room. He acted intoxicated, cried and made a scene, refusing to let me leave, holding on to me and talking nonsense all night. Unexpectedly, the usually serious and rigid guy turned into a child when drunk. When he woke up and saw me, he looked surprised. After that, he frequently visited my office, but it seemed like his purpose had changed. As someone with experience, I was well aware of his intentions. Seeing through without exposing, it was the best way to get along with him so far. Regarding the teasing from colleagues about Caleb, I thought it might be out of sympathy for me. I chuckled, told a white lie, "How can that be? Caleb is not easy to fool. He doesn't tolerate any nonsense." The moment the words fell, a familiar voice suddenly sounded from behind, talking behind my back. I was startled and quickly turned around, indeed seeing Caleb's face. His gaze was intense, and his expression stiff, likely having heard what I said just now. Colleagues on the opposite side immediately stood up, and naturally, I followed suit. Just as I was about to speak, he directly said, "It seems Manager Ruby has strong opinions about me. How about we have a good chat in your office tomorrow after work?" I forced a smile, sure. With that, he smiled faintly and walked away. Colleagues patted their chests in relief, sighing, "Looks like we shouldn't casually talk behind people's backs in the future." I replied, "The unfortunate one is me, okay?" Since there was something urgent, a colleague left first. The thought of going back to the empty home made me reluctant. After having a few more drinks and feeling a bit intoxicated, I decided to get up and leave. Unexpectedly, at that moment of standing up, I saw Luke's figure. Not just him, but also my former colleague, Nevaeh. He seemed to have arranged to meet someone, as there were a few others at their table, both men and women. A perfect opportunity. I couldn't let Luke maintain his dignity, or else, wouldn't I be carrying the title of Mrs. Luke in vain? I picked up the remaining half-filled glass on the table and walked towards Luke. "Husband, what a coincidence." I approached them, smiling. Luke looked up upon hearing my voice, surprised. Nevaeh, who was holding onto his arm, immediately stiffened. The others at the table had varied expressions. I tilted my head at Luke and asked softly, "Husband, you wouldn't mind me joining, right?" Apart from a momentary surprise when he saw me, Luke quickly returned to his usual self. He leisurely pushed away Nevaeh's wrist, stood up, walked in front of me, chuckled, and whispered, "Ruby, you really know how to give me face." Seeing him clenching his teeth, I didn't feel much joy, and even more disappointment. But I couldn't stop there. I smiled at him, raised my voice a bit, and asked, "Husband, are these your friends? Can you introduce them to me?" I turned and looked at Nevaeh, scanning her up and down. She turned pale, obviously aware of the situation. Her position was awkward. I took a few steps forward, approached her, and said, "Is this Miss Nevaeh? Long time no see." She remained silent, glancing at Luke when she raised her eyes. I continued, "Miss Nevaeh, don't you recognize me? We used to be colleagues." "It's okay if you don't, let me reintroduce myself." I pointed to Luke behind me, then extended my hand to her, saying, "Nice to meet you again, Ruby. Luke is my husband." My intentionally loud voice made everyone around us hear. The meaning of asserting dominance couldn't be more evident. The people at the table looked at each other. Nevaeh blushed, wanting to speak but enduring it. She dared not make a scene in front of Luke, that was her tactful side. But I was different. I was not very sensible, never understanding the need to save face for Luke. This was another reason he was fed up with me. Nevaeh clenched her hands, continuously looking at Luke. Luke, experienced and composed, as if detached from the situation, lightly said behind me, "Ruby, had a bit too much to drink? Tonight. I'll personally take you home." I couldn't help but laugh out loud in the car, thinking about Nevaeh's expression just now, as if she had eaten a fly. It was a hearty laughter, tears streaming down my face by the end. Luke ignored me, lowered the car window, let the wind disperse the laughter inside, and muttered to himself, "Crazy." I wiped my tears with a tissue, adjusted my expression, and asked him, "Am I crazy, or is Luke amazing, handling things so effortlessly?" Suddenly, Luke slammed on the brakes, stopping directly on the road. He turned his head to look at me with a cold face and said, "Had enough of your weirdness?" I chuckled softly and asked, "Are you angry? Did I embarrass you just now? If you think I embarrassed you, let's get a divorce." He gritted his teeth, "Dream on." I continued to tease him with a smile, "Nevaeh is not as beautiful as me. Taking her out, don't you feel like you're making me lose face?" Luke frowned, his eyebrows tightening, his hand gripping the steering wheel. He unlocked the door, his voice low, "Get out." I opened the door and got out without hesitation. The air inside the car was suffocating. I closed the door, and Luke accelerated away. I stood on the street for a moment. The wind was strong, the night was deep, and the chill was heavy. Coincidentally, it started drizzling again. Raindrops fell on me, chilling me to the core. The taxi app on my phone had been unanswered, probably because it was too late. I walked forward while checking my phone. I was startled by the sudden sound of a horn next to me. The person rolled down the car window and forced a somewhat unnatural smile. I bent down to take a look. "Caleb?" He pursed his lips, cleared his throat, and spoke to me, "Get in, the rain is getting heavy." I shook my head and declined. It couldn't be that coincidental for him to appear right now. Caleb parked his car in front of me and got out, blocking my way. I stopped and looked at him. He held an umbrella, offering it to me. I took it and said, "Thanks, I'll return it to you at the office tomorrow." "No need," he replied, stepping aside, then asked, "Why not get in the car?" I smiled, explaining, "How can I let a colleague send me home?" He said, "Maybe I'm just passing by." I responded, "Even if you are, it's not suitable." He sighed softly, saying, "I might be a bit too much." Today, I decided to reveal his intentions directly. "Your intentions aren't too much." He froze, standing in the rain for several seconds before reacting. He lowered his head with a wry smile, "So you figured it out early?" I asked, "You were at the bar today too, you must have seen everything. Why did you follow me?" He looked up, gazing at me. The night scene reflected in his eyes, shimmering with raindrops. "Just worried, came to check on you, didn't expect you to get out of the car." His explanation was honest, but for some reason, I felt a bit flustered. I remained silent, confronting him in the rain. Eventually, he broke the silence. "I'll drive you home, it's too late, not safe." Compared to his honesty, I felt like I was a mess. Since that business trip when he started showing signs, I pretended not to know, keeping him in the dark. I should have explained things to him earlier. I nodded and decided to have a brief conversation with him in the car. He opened the door for me, even took off his suit jacket to shield me from the rain. His arm arched above my head, emitting a faint fragrance. As I was about to enter the car, my body was suddenly pulled back. There was a sturdy chest behind me, rising and falling rapidly. I turned around, and to my surprise, it was Luke. He looked down at me, his eyes deep. "Are you getting into anyone's car so casually now?" His words were sarcastic, as if questioning whether I crawled into anyone's bed. Thieves calling out thieves, so shamelessly righteous. I was angry, tempted to slap him, but he was quicker, tightly gripping my hand. Caleb heard his words and anger flashed across his face. "Sir, that's a bit too much." Luke, with cold eyes, exerted more force, emphasizing, "I am Luke, her husband." Caleb clenched his fists, gripping his clothes at the wrists. "If you're her husband, you should respect your wife even more." Luke sneered, "Who are you? What business is it of yours between us?" I struggled, trying to break free from Luke's restraint, but the more I moved, the tighter his grip became. As Caleb was about to speak, I quickly interjected, "He's my colleague, just happened to be passing by." I didn't want to witness a conflict, especially with Caleb seemingly suppressed by Luke at every turn. I didn't want him involved in my messed up life. After hearing my explanation, Caleb's face briefly showed disappointment, and he didn't say anything further. Luke embraced me, gave Caleb a deep look, then turned and quickly left, stuffing me into the passenger seat. He locked the doors and sped away. Continuing to taunt, Luke said, "Disappointed I showed up? Ruined your little arrangement?" I searched my bag for a cigarette, and as I pulled one out, he immediately warned, "Ruby, if you dare smoke in the car, just try it." Ignoring him, I placed the cigarette in my mouth. Are you planning to throw me out of the car again, or maybe hit me? Then, under his furious gaze, I lit the cigarette. He reached over to grab it, but I moved back, avoiding him. Frustrated, he pulled over and leaned over. I continued to evade, but he pressed against me. When our breaths were close, both of us froze. The scent of smoke filled the car, making him frown. He snatched the cigarette from me and stubbed it out on the window. I pushed him, but he remained on top of me. Apart from what you've said, do you have any other ways to control me? Before he could respond, his phone rang. It was connected to Bluetooth, and the screen displayed the caller's name, Nevaeh. Luke turned his head, and his expression flickered at the name. While he was distracted, I forcefully pushed him away. Refusing to divorce is disgusting enough. Can you stop doing things that make me even more disgusted? Another tumultuous encounter ended with him putting me down and leaving immediately. I didn't know if he went to find Nevaeh, but he was quite successful in making me feel disgusted once again. The next day at work, I felt a bit awkward when I encountered Caleb. He didn't show any signs of discomfort. During the lunch break, just before it ended, Caleb suddenly knocked on my door and handed me a packed lunchbox. He asked, "Can smoking fill you up?" To ask such a question, I guessed he had deliberately paid attention to me. I smiled and said, "But it can help you lose weight. Want to give it a try?" I put down the lunch he gave me, then took out a cigarette box from the drawer and offered it to him. "Caleb, want to give it a try?" He took a deep breath, his face showing a bit of seriousness. "Stop playing around, and don't pretend in front of me. It's not necessary." My hand holding the cigarette box trembled slightly. After advising me about lunch, he turned and left. I lowered my head and opened the lunch box in front of me. Inside was a simple meal, still emitting warmth. My stomach wasn't great, and Luke knew it. In the past, he used to remind me every day to eat well, avoid cold foods. He knew about my stomach issues and was particularly attentive. Now, I drink excessively, and he doesn't say a word. Caleb, on the other hand, just an ordinary colleague, somehow knows to remind me to eat well. A few days later, when I was working late and left the office later than usual, I was suddenly stopped by a stranger in the underground parking lot. The man didn't seem friendly, grabbing my arm forcefully, attempting to drag me away. I stumbled, my high heels causing me to almost fall. Fortunately, someone appeared behind me and steadied me with a gentle touch. Startled, I looked back, and the stranger who grabbed my arm was kicked away by the man behind me. Turning around, I coincidentally met Caleb's gentle eyes. He slowly released his grip on my arm, then stepped forward, raising his hand to deliver a powerful punch to the stranger who was attempting to approach again. When I turned earlier, I twisted my ankle, unable to hold on to Caleb. I could only lean against the car door, waiting for him to finish. The man fled in panic. Caleb turned back to look at me, while tidying up his somewhat disheveled clothes. I sprained my ankle and couldn't drive. Caleb helped me into his car, saying he would take me to the hospital. After the hospital, he also drove me home. When we arrived downstairs, he noticed my difficulty in movement. He opened the car door, got out, and cautiously asked if I needed help. I shook my head, not wanting to trouble him further, and thanked him. He simply acknowledged and said nothing more. My mind was in chaos, and my clenched fist revealed my inner turmoil. "Caleb, you can go back," I said, attempting to ease the situation. There was hesitation in his eyes, and his tense expression displayed various conflicts. After a moment, I couldn't help but speak again. "Caleb." He suddenly interrupted me, "We can talk later. Don't stand if your leg is uncomfortable. I'll watch you go upstairs." With those words, I immediately turned away because my heart felt aching, and even the tip of my nose felt sour. His hesitant manner made me particularly uncomfortable. He knew I was married, aware of the strained relationship between my husband and me. However, he never revealed it, never insisted, never mentioned my marital status explicitly, nor did he convey his feelings directly. His current state only added to my confusion. I leaned on the wall, slowly climbing the stairs. When I entered, I found the lights on in the house. There were men's shoes at the entrance. Luke was here? For a moment, I strangely felt relieved that I hadn't let Caleb accompany me upstairs. If it were an open and honest relationship, I shouldn't have such thoughts. It's not like I can't face people. The study was lit, and Luke should be inside. But I didn't want to face him, so I went directly to the bathroom to take a shower. When I came out, he was still in the study. Carrying an ashtray, I went to the balcony to smoke. I developed this habit over the past 2 years. This was the marital home we chose when we got married, a spacious flat. It felt too empty for one person. I only knew about one of his properties initially, but now I knew he had more than one place. I turned off the lights in the living room, leaving only the dim light from the crescent moon on the balcony. I was used to being alone and didn't like it too bright. When smoking, I wanted to see the sparks. Suddenly, the living room light turned on, and Luke's figure appeared at the entrance of the balcony. I said, "Turn off the lights." He said, "Put out the cigarette." Neither of us yielded, frozen in place. He had taken a shower. I noticed that the bathroom had been used. He was in casual home wear, giving off an air of nonchalance, but his complexion was not good. I exhaled the smoke, saying, "Next time, after meeting other women, don't come here to shower. I find it dirty." He walked over, took the cigarette from my hand, and extinguished it in the ashtray. Nodding, he approached me. "Find me dirty? Ruby, it seems I should teach you how to be my wife again." With those words, he pressed me against the balcony, grabbing the back of my head, and kissed me forcefully. My mouth had the taste of smoke, which he couldn't bear, wrinkling his brow. I bit his lip forcefully. He winced, lifted his head, and glared at me. "Ruby, don't be ungrateful." I pushed him away and hurried to the bathroom. Sitting on the toilet, trembling hands lit another cigarette. I heard the sound of the front door being slammed shut. Luke had left. He didn't consider this place as home. Before going to bed, I suddenly received a message from Caleb. He said, "The lighter fell into my car. And then, I'll bring it to the office for you tomorrow." I replied, "Okay." He directly called me. I answered, and the house was very quiet. His breath was in my ear. "I saw him leave, and then chose to send you a message." His voice lacked confidence, slow and deep. This explanation made me particularly emotional. He was a well-off young man with a good family background and education. Why did he have to act so humbly with me? I couldn't help it. I sniffed. Hearing the sound, he spoke urgently, "Ruby, don't cry." I hung up his call, covered myself with the blanket, and cried quietly. I don't know if it was grievances or touched feelings, but I really wanted to cry. The company was invited to a project bidding cocktail party, and I decided to attend alone. Unexpectedly, I ran into Luke there, arm in arm with another woman. He hesitated for a rare moment when he saw me. The woman by his side noticed me too and, at that moment, made an effort to get closer to Luke. Feeling exceptionally irritated, I downed a glass of champagne and was about to confront them when someone suddenly grabbed my arm. "Don't be impulsive," Caleb said. He slowly pulled my arm into his, shifted his gaze back to me, and added, "If you feel upset, I can be your companion." He tightened his grip on my arm, as if subtly suggesting that I shouldn't lose control. Surprisingly, I found myself calming down without a cigarette. Tilting my head, I smiled at him. "I'm not upset, just a little annoyed." He whispered, "That's good." Caleb and I continued our intimate conversation, arm in arm, resembling a couple. Before finishing a drink, Luke took the initiative to approach me. He was alone, and the woman was nowhere to be seen. With one hand in his pocket, he took the glass from my hand and clinked it with Caleb's, saying, "Finding someone younger to stimulate me?" I clenched my fists inwardly, replying, "Luke, you really overestimate yourself." Caleb glanced up and down at Luke, stating, "Being young is an advantage, something Luke can't envy." Luke forcefully placed his glass down. He was too irritated to continue drinking. He pulled me out of Caleb's side, saying, "Come home with me." I resisted, but Caleb, unusually, didn't back down and also grabbed my other arm. Caleb squinted. "Luke, isn't this a bit uncalled for?" Luke exerted force, pulling me over and embracing me. Slowly and deliberately, he said, "I should have introduced him earlier. He's my wife." Caleb momentarily froze. I looked up at Caleb and saw the melancholy in his eyes. It felt uncomfortable and even a bit painful. I turned to Luke, glaring at him. He clearly harbored resentment towards me, solely seeking revenge, yet now he pretended to care about me. I pushed away from Luke's grasp, my body trembling at the thought that his hand had just held another woman. I needed a cigarette, I needed an outlet. Speaking in a low voice, I said beside him, "Luke, I want a divorce." When I found out about Luke's affair, I confronted him once, expressing my anger. He easily persuaded me, or rather, threatened me. "Ruby, I'm giving you one chance. Take back what you just said, leave me, or you won't survive," he said, implying that if I didn't comply, he had the power to ruin my life. Looking back, was there anything worse than the current situation? enduring my husband's infidelity and the aftermath with someone else. I was spineless, and within our circle, Luke had the influence to easily push me out. He wasn't joking. He wanted me to obey and endure his acts of revenge. When Luke heard my words, he raised an eyebrow slightly, his eyes showing anger. He mockingly asked, "Ruby, do you want me to give you another chance?" It was another threat, but in public, he couldn't afford to lose his composure. I stepped back from him, turned around, and walked away. The exhibition was in the evening, and as I exited the venue, a cold wind greeted me. The evening gown provided little warmth, and despite shivering, I was eager to find a cigarette. While rummaging through my bag, a leg suddenly blocked my path, and I fell to the ground without noticing. "Ruby, you really look like a ghost now." Luke's affair, Nevaeh, suddenly appeared, looking down at me triumphantly. She held a grudge against me, thinking I was the one who reported her when she was fired. In reality, I had nothing to do with it. It was her own wrongdoing. I stood up, and my gaze fell on her abdomen. Then, I raised my hand and slapped her hard. I asked her, "Nevaeh, if your child grows up and learns that you conceived him while providing services for someone else, would he be ashamed of you?" Nevaeh was stunned by my slap, covering her face and glaring at me, even attempting to retaliate. Just as she raised her hand, Luke appeared. Nevaeh was scared of him, and upon seeing him, she dared not make a move, only crying to him about the grievances she suffered from me. Luke sternly told her, "Go home, I'll come to you later." I had no intention of listening to him or going home. Instead, I decided to go to a bar and drown my sorrows. Damn it. Despicable couple. I sneered, "Sorry, Luke, I'm pretty busy. If you want to schedule another appointment, please do so in advance." Luke showed anger on his face. I ignored them and walked away in the opposite direction. Soon, a car horn sounded nearby. I turned my head, and Caleb's face appeared when the car window rolled down. "Get in, it's too cold outside." I said I wanted to go to the bar, but Caleb took me to a pharmacy instead. He bought disinfectant and cotton swabs, and in the car, he carefully disinfected the bruise on my arm from the fall. Apparently, he noticed it, and if it hadn't started hurting more, I might not have even realized it myself. It was truly maddening. "Does it hurt?" he asked, looking up. I shook my head and said, "Not really. Endure it for a bit, it'll be fine soon." He lowered his head again, diligently wiping the wound. I watched the swaying motion of his head, and my heart swayed along with it. I chuckled softly at myself and asked him, "Caleb, don't you think I'm a mess? Why bother getting involved? Aren't you afraid you'll end up a mess too?" After he finished tidying up, he checked again to make sure the wound was treated properly before looking at me. He asked, "Where's the mess?" I hesitated. He asked again, "If you think it's a mess, you should strive to change the situation. Smoking and drinking won't solve any problems." His words left me speechless, unsure of how to respond. I smoked and drank, numbing myself, avoiding confrontation for 2 whole years, and he pointed it out with just a few words. What if I never change? He reached up and adjusted his tie, not loosening it but more like an unconscious gesture. After a while, he looked at me, his eyes shining. "Ruby, if your decision aligns with mine, I'd be happy, but making decisions is my own business, unrelated to you. Don't burden yourself." What was his thought process? What were my thoughts? When a fleeting idea crossed my mind, I was so scared that my fingers trembled. He started the car again, as if to reassure me, whispering, "It's just a matter of waiting, nothing difficult, and it has nothing to do with you." Caleb drove me home. I rushed through the door without changing shoes, and a glass shattered beside me. The glass held alcohol, splattering all over the floor. The smell of alcohol filled the house. Luke leaned against the table, waiting for me. His suit was unbuttoned, tie disheveled, and shirt untucked, displaying his frustration and anger. I stood at the entrance, watching him. He strode towards me, reaching out to pull me towards the bathroom. "Ruby, don't think I didn't see who brought you back. Go clean up for me." "Luke, let go of me." I struggled to push him away. His strength was overpowering, and despite my efforts, I couldn't push him off. Perhaps it was my exaggerated reaction or his sheer madness, but while evading, I received a slap on my face. The slap brought me to a standstill. Likewise, Luke finally regained his composure. He seemed almost disbelieving, as if questioning whether that slap had come from him. "Ruby." He reached out again, attempting to grab me. I pushed him away firmly. "Don't touch me." Then I quickly walked to the living room, searching frantically in the sideboard. In a hurry, I found the cigarettes and lit one. My hand trembled continuously with anger. Luke scowled, watching me. "Don't smoke in the living room." At this moment, he still had the audacity to try and control my actions. I raised my hand, forcefully throwing the lighter towards him. The metal lighter hit his forehead, leaving a bleeding cut. He winced, inhaling sharply through his teeth. I hadn't intended for it to hit him, it was a spur-of-the-moment reaction driven by anger. After taking a deep drag of the cigarette, I extinguished it as he suggested. Luke walked to the table, grabbed some tissues, and wiped the blood flowing down from his forehead. His expression grew even darker. "Do you hate me to the point of wanting to kill me?" I looked up at his wound and replied, "At least I don't love you anymore." His wiping motion paused for a moment, his eyes flickered. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke. "Thinking of divorce? Dream on." I reached out to Nevaeh, needing her assistance with a particular matter. Through some means, I discovered Luke's father's address. This marked the first time I saw Nevaeh since my mother left. She could hardly recognize me anymore. I introduced myself seriously, an ironic situation. She knew of my existence as Luke's daughter but never expected me to show up, let alone in my current role as her daughter-in-law. This revelation shocked Luke's father. He became furious, deeming Luke's actions outrageous. However, when it came to his ex-wife, who was now seriously ill, guilt silenced both him and my mother. Nevaeh entered the scene, using her pregnancy as a reason to seek a legitimate status for herself. She was eager for me to divorce Luke and wanted her child to have a lawful identity upon birth. So, she agreed. As for me, my only desire was to escape from Luke. While I had thought about this before, my stubbornness prevented me from actively seeking out my mother. She abandoned me, and I couldn't bring myself to take the initiative or swallow my pride. Yet, for some reason, Caleb's resolute words lingered in my mind, and I found an unexpected determination to end this marriage. In the past, I believed that changing my life wouldn't make much of a difference in the face of its hardships. Now, however, I felt the need to fight for something better. Smoking and drinking excessively would only lead to a worsening situation. Luke's father called him immediately, addressing the unresolved issues from the past. He demanded that Luke divorce me, putting an end to this somewhat abnormal relationship. I reluctantly sought help from my mother, using the only connection left to resolve the situation. When Luke learned about my actions, he came to find me. At that moment, I was packing my bags, and he had a band-aid on his forehead. He stood by the bedroom door with crossed arms, tapping on it to alert me of his presence. "Quite clever, using my father against me," he remarked. "Thank you for the compliment, Luke. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I've driven you to desperation? I thought you couldn't care less." As he approached, he glanced at the clothes scattered on the bed, picking up one and examining it. "This one, I picked it for you the first time we went shopping together, right?" I looked up and replied, "You've got a heap there that you're planning to toss." Luke fell silent for a moment, then spoke again. "Want a divorce? It's not impossible, but you have to agree to one condition." I didn't expect him to relent so easily. Perhaps the pressure from his father was significant. Oddly, I felt a tinge of excitement upon hearing his concession. Wary of any tricks, I asked, "What condition?" He tossed the clothes he held into the nearby trash can. "Accompany me to visit my mother." With that, he turned and walked out. It wasn't an easy condition to refuse. Throughout our marriage, I had never met his mother. Initially, I was curious, but after learning the truth, I had no desire to meet his family. His mother resided in a specialized care facility for the elderly, not a place just anyone could stay. She looked much older than her age, her hair already turned white. Probably due to her illness. We spent some time with her, though her memory was muddled, recognizing Luke one moment and not the next. Surprisingly, she asked if I was her daughter-in-law, and I chose not to deny it, not wanting to upset her. After leaving the hospital, we went straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. When I registered our marriage, it was out of joy and haste. Now, divorcing him, I felt no nostalgia, it was merely an escape. As we got out of the car at home, Luke suddenly spoke. "Ruby, I didn't know you were her daughter at first." "So what?" I asked. He didn't answer but smirked and chuckled softly. I couldn't recall the last time I had seen him smile, his laughter was a distant memory. My heart trembled slightly, but I chose to open the door and exit, heading upstairs. He probably wanted to say that he didn't know at first, that he genuinely loved me at the beginning. My mother came to see me several times, wanting to give me money, thinking it was the best way to make amends. However, I felt it was an insult and refused. After changing my address, she couldn't find me again. I distanced myself from Luke's family and their affairs. I don't know if it was out of guilt, but she surprisingly went to see my father. I don't know the details of their conversation, but since then, my father never asked me for money again. A month after my divorce from Luke, Nevaeh suddenly asked to meet. She looked pregnant and sat alone in the corner of the coffee shop, looking forlorn. The first thing she said to me was that Luke refused to marry her. "It's your business," I replied, feeling that it wasn't appropriate for her to seek me out at this time. Nevaeh's face was pale, constantly stirring her hot cocoa. "But he rejected me because of the last time I went to his house with you. Ruby, you used me." Given Luke's personality, I thought it was just an excuse. I asked her, "Don't you want me to divorce him?" She fell silent. I continued, "You should have considered that when you were his mistress. Why do you act like I owe you something now?" Her logic was beyond my understanding. She put down the spoon, withdrew her hand, and gently placed it on her belly. "Ruby, do you know what he told me?" "I'm not interested," I replied. She chuckled softly, with a hint of loss in her words. "He said he wouldn't marry a woman he didn't love." My heart tightened. Did that mean Luke married me because he loved me? But I also married him because I loved him. He clearly didn't cherish it. It was useless to say such things now. I stood up and said, "Don't involve me in your affairs anymore. I'm not interested, and I won't participate." As I walked away, Nevaeh suddenly slammed the table and stood up, glaring at me with gritted teeth. "Ruby, you're shameless. You used me. You must have deceived me. You're trying to retaliate against me." She shouted and grabbed the hot drink on the table, preparing to throw it at me. Just as it was about to hit me, a shadow appeared in front of me. I looked up and saw his gentle eyes. "Caleb?" Caleb suddenly appeared, blocking the hot drink that was about to be thrown at me. His back got completely soaked in the process. Since our last parting, I hadn't seen him. Rumors in the company had it that he had some conflicts with his father and left on his own. The cafe staff came over to mediate, thinking there was a love triangle among us. Caleb took off his suit, and the hot drink dripped down his clothes. He glanced at Nevaeh, pausing briefly at her protruding belly, and then said, "Madam, please mind your words and actions." With that, he took me out of the cafe. Later, he took me in his car. He asked, "Changed your address?" "Yes, moved." "Well, would you mind telling me the new address?" I chuckled softly. He then asked, "Divorced? This is such a big event, and I haven't even celebrated yet. How about we go for a drink together? Just don't drink too much." "Fine." I pretended to be nonchalant and asked, "Heard you had a fight with Caleb?" He glanced at me and chuckled softly. "Where did you hear that gossip? And it's not accurate." Oh, I actually wanted to ask where he had been. But I didn't dare to ask directly, nor did I have the standing. "Not accurate?" He looked at the time, turned his head, and said, "How about dinner together?" I immediately said, "My treat." He smirked and said, "I'm not competing with you. No need to rush." I wasn't in a hurry. Nonsense. He chose the restaurant, and it seemed like he was a regular there. The waiter knew his taste. When it came time to pay, he didn't compete with me. Instead, he insisted on driving me home. When we reached downstairs to my place, he asked, "Did you want to know why I'm no longer at the company?" I stammered and denied, "No. It's normal not to be there." Leaning on the car door, he looked at me with his arms crossed. "I thought you wanted to know." It seems I was mistaken. I hesitated for a moment and said, "If you want to tell me, I can listen." He laughed out loud. "Ruby, I didn't think you were so awkward before." Blushing, I retorted, "The person you knew before probably wasn't me." He stopped smiling, looked at me seriously, and said in a low voice, "The person I knew before was also you. Before, now, the past, it's all you." I froze after hearing his words. He lowered his head and explained, "It's not that I had a fight with my dad. I left to start my own business." "Start your own business?" He nodded, a hint of a smile in his eyes. "I can't let my future girlfriend work for my dad forever, can I?" I didn't react for a moment. He didn't give me a chance to respond and turned away, getting into the car. After starting the car, he rolled down the window, revealing a big smile I had never seen since I knew him. He gestured near his ear, indicating I should contact him by phone, then drove away. Thinking about it now, he always seemed to be like this, calm and composed. In his words, waiting is not a difficult thing. As I watched his car disappear, I turned around, feeling inexplicably happy, and my steps quickened. Entering the house, I swiftly threw away all the cigarettes and saw the lighter. It was the one I left in Caleb's car. Recalling the humility in his voice when he called me that night, I couldn't help feeling pity. So, the taste of life, sometimes, might not always be frustrating. If it is, as Caleb said, one should strive to change that situation.